everybody, and welcome to Remote Engagement. Today we're talking about strategic engagement for your employees during COVID-19. Welcome. We are in the middle of what we're calling a re-recording. When you were with us yesterday, there were some audio issues with WebEx, and we promised to re-record this and send it to you. So if you're listening now, this is the re-recording, and we do not have a live audience, although we'll incorporate your feedback along the way from yesterday's live recording. If you've taken the time to listen to this, to engage, if you've scheduled this time to learn more about remote engagement, you are already a change agent, and change starts here with you today. I'm Gary Magenta. I'm the Senior Vice President and Chief Change Architect at Root, Inc., and I'm joined by my colleague today who will introduce herself. Hi, Jill.
Hi, Gary. I'm Jill Kiepura. I'm a Principal Consultant with Root.
Welcome, Jill. Jill's going to bring us an interesting case study today that we'll dig into. Last week when we did our first remote engagement webinar, we asked all of you that were participating how many were calling in from home and how many were calling in from their office. And what we heard is that there were 45% of you that were working from home and 55% of you that were in the office. Well, this week, meaning Tuesday, the 17th of March, that number changed dramatically. This week, we heard 90% of you were home and only 10% of you were in the office. So that was a dramatic increase of another 45% of you working from home. So no matter where you are today, we hope that you're safe, and we thank you for being with us. Because we know we're all dealing with uncertainty, this uncertainty that we're calling COVID-19, and that our business strategies and our priorities are shifting by the day, if not by the hour, even minute in some businesses. And this is prompting an even greater need to engage our teams. We just simply cannot leave them hanging out in the dark, wondering what's going on and how they can contribute. In fact, we must act deliberately to engage our people remotely because it's just not that easy in this environment. Many times when we're working together, whether it's in the field or in an office, that transfer of knowledge just happens organically because we're together. And when we are disparate and remote, we have to be very deliberate in our actions. So we're here to talk about that today. The Root team is here to help you, and Jill and I hopefully will be able to answer a lot of questions for you today. We've got a few promises for you. We promise that during our time together today, we're going to share the current trends that we're tracking at Root around the growing remote workforce, whether it's temporary or permanent. We know that it's growing rapidly right now. And we'll share with you Root's experience in creating strategic engagement with remote workers. Jill?
Yeah, and with that in mind, I'm going to share a case study of where we successfully engaged a nationwide distributed healthcare workforce.
Yeah, thank you for that. I know that many people joined specifically for that case study. And we also know, Jill, that companies are working virtually more and more every day. Again, our attendees, 90% of them are joining from home. But we just put up some of the best known companies that have said, stay home, don't come in, at least into our corporate offices. So while there are many, many, many organizations, here are some of the best known, and that's how quickly our landscape has changed in the last week. We also know that there are travel bans and school closings and a request from our government now not to convene in groups of more than 10 people. So during our live session yesterday, Jill, we asked everybody, what are you impacted by? Which ones, 1, 2, 3, or 1, 2, and 3? Which scenario have you been impacted by most? And what we heard is overwhelmingly, almost everyone was impacted by at least 2 of these, and a lot of people 3. So none of us are immune to this. I know that the travel ban and the no groups of more than 10 certainly are the 2 for me because my children are well above school age, although one of them is in his grad program and his school is closed as well. So all of us are being impacted by one or all of these things. And many of us are practicing social distancing. So that, of course, is keeping us very deliberately, very consciously, physically away from one another. at least 6 feet, if not more than that. So we wanted to share with you today a case study of an organization that we work with that needed to engage many, many people. And here's what they recognized. That engagement on a normal basis requires an emotional and intellectual connection. That's just sort of our everyday understanding, and that many of us are engaging our people in those two principles. But remote engagement requires a little bit more. We have to connect people emotionally, as I've said, because for many people, this is scary or this is different and exciting. I don't mean in a good way, but there's excitement going on around the change. And that intellectually, when there isn't enough information for people, they will fill in their own blanks, and their story's just not going to be as good or accurate. And if you build on that, we know that behaviorally, human beings learn from one another. And with this social distancing, that's making it harder. So we have to be deliberate to include the ability for human beings to learn from one another. And another big one is social. We've got to continue to allow people to recognize and reward one another, because that's that socialization, that affirmation in our actions and behaviors that we crave and we thrive on. So emotional and intellectual, sure, we're all thriving for that regularly, but let's be even more deliberate about those and make sure that we're adding on the ability for human beings to learn from one another and the ability to socialize with one another so we can reward and recognize. And if you do those things and you do them well, we call that true engagement. And those are the 4 principles we're asking you to think about in this world when we're now engaging people remotely. So, Jill, with that, I want to hand you over the ball so that you can share with people the case study that a lot of people came in to see today. So I have handed you the ball, and if you would take it away for us.
All right, thanks, Gary. So we worked recently with a health system that had over 50,000 employees serving 28 states. And we worked with them to engage employees across the organization in the why, the what, and how of some significant changes that were happening. Now, while we weren't in the midst of COVID-19 at the time, they couldn't bring all of their leaders together from all 28 states in person in a timely and cost-effective way. So we had to find an alternative that could work virtually and still achieve the same outcomes. So to do this, we worked with them to create a virtual map. This is a small group facilitated discussion with groups of 6 to 10 people. We used facilitators that were trained from within the organization. And the virtual map is platform agnostic, so you can use any web conferencing tool like WebEx, Zoom, or Skype. We find that keeping it as flexible as possible is really helpful because you don't have to then buy new technology or learn how to use a new technology. And then finally, it's not an e-learning or a virtual slide presentation. The key is that we integrated visualization, group dialogue, and allowed people to come to their own conclusions rather than be told what to do. So it doesn't matter if it's in person or virtual, but really applying that methodology and engaging people regardless of how you're bringing them together. Now, when you have a virtual meeting, we all know that we can see it as an excuse to multitask, pet our cats, check our phones, play solitaire, take a nap. We're all guilty of it, whether it's intentional or not, let's be honest. So the question is, how do you get beyond that?
I'm fully paying attention to you, Jill. I'm right here.
I see you on that video screen. I'm watching you. And I appreciate it. In this case, we use the virtual map as a way to bring people together from these different contexts. No matter where you're at, you're anchoring in the same discussion, in the same dialogue. So what I'm going to do is walk you through just a few key features that I want to call out that we used in the virtual map setting, but I think can be applied more broadly to any kind of virtual engagement as a way to keep people engaged. So the first thing I want to call out is entering people's names into whatever program you're using or whatever platform you're using, and then keeping it fun, finding a way to keep people involved. So the way we did this with the virtual map is the facilitator would enter everyone's name in the first screen, and then the program actually would select readers at random. So it was a way to keep it fun, keep people engaged. So if Gary was, checking his email or petting his cat in the middle of this call, and it selected him, he would be called out, and it makes it a little less awkward for the facilitator. The second thing I want to point out is just asking questions, finding a way to ask questions and engage people in a dialogue, so it's not just a one-way. I'm talking at you right now, but ideally we bring in, and when we had the chat yesterday, it was actually a way to bring people in and engage people in questions. In the virtual map example here, we have questions on the bottom of the screen that participants would be asked to read and would really guide the conversation, so they're not being talked at the whole time.
Yeah.
A couple of other things I want to call out here is how you make it easy for the facilitator. So we're all learning technology as we go. Some of us may be more proficient than others to start with in things like WebEx or Zoom or Skype. But in this case, we have the current reader called out at the bottom of the screen, and we have the time called out at the bottom of the screen, just to make the technology a little bit less of a concern for the facilitator and make it as easy as possible for them to manage the group and just manage the timing and who's reading throughout the discussion. And then the last thing I want to call out is how you make it interactive. So in the virtual map, we have card activities built in throughout. Some of them have readers called out to read the additional content. Others have more of an interactive matching game element where you have discussion. And really the point here is to bring in some variety, because if you just ask dialogue questions, or if you just present slides, or if you just have one element, people get used to that really quickly, and then they stop paying attention. They start checking those emails. They start looking around. And so ways to really shake things up is it can be really, really effective in this virtual setting. So with that in mind, Gary, I sense I'm losing you. So maybe we do a quick demo on this?
No, you're not losing me. Good tips. Good tips, Jill. I'm with you. What can I do?
So I'm going to share my screen here. And this is part of, can you see what's on my screen? Let me move my video out of the way. All right. So this is the beginning, during the first section of the virtual map experience. We've covered a few elements already, and we've talked about kind of the general context. And now we're getting into kind of the root causes behind people's overall health. So I'm going to ask you to read the question on the bottom of the screen, A4, for me to start with.
Okay, A4 is called a flawed system. The root cause card, and just to clarify, that's not Root Inc., that's just this organization's root cause. The root cause cards indicate how much of an individual's overall health is influenced by external factors beyond our DNA. As a group, let's match each card to the correct label from the visual. So it says, Jill, here, as a group. So just reinforcing for people, we'd have 6, 8, 10 people online in this breakout. Is that right?
Yep, that's correct. So you'd be chatting with them, to not on your own for this answer.
All right, so that's the best
but for
practice
now,
here.
What do you think?
For now, I'm on the spot. Okay, yesterday live, I got it all wrong, but I think I may have learned a little bit. Okay, so I'm going to do better today. Physical environment, I'm going to say physical environment is 10%.
All right.
And then socioeconomic is 40%. Do I have access to good food, good health care, et cetera? Clinical, medical care, and health behaviors. 30% health behaviors and 20% clinical medical care is my guess on this.
And you did it. You learned from yesterday. Way to go, Gary.
Okay, so kind of unfair. However, what I point out here, because I did it yesterday and I didn't practice in between, but I did learn from my mistake. However, when you're in a group of 6, 8, or 10, what I want to call out to our participants today is that they're in conversation, informing one another based on their perspective and knowledge. So oftentimes they do get it right or close to right because it's a group discussion. Is that accurate, Jill?
Right, and I think the other piece is if you get it wrong, then you tend to remember that as well. So the fact that you got them all wrong yesterday, I think motivated you to really think about it a little more today.
I don't want to just, I don't want to just be another pretty face. I want to get some stuff right.
And then the conversation will go on with more discussion questions. So again, continuing the engagement and different ways of engaging people throughout the conversation.
Yeah, so I see it's going into a deeper dive on what do those things mean, et cetera. Sure. Okay,
right,
great.
Exactly. So, Gary, jumping back into the slides here, we know that real change occurs when you can create both that intellectual and emotional connection like you talked about. On the screen is a word cloud that indicates how people were feeling about this new strategy after going through the MAP experience. What do you notice here?
Okay, so I notice first and foremost that just pops out is people are excited, and then I see positive, optimistic, hope, good, opportunity, great, and then if I squint a little bit, inspired, interested, intrigued, encouraged, innovating, and squint a little bit more, less though, you see things like nervous or skeptical. So they're overwhelmingly is excited, positive, optimistic, good, all those things that we're hoping for. And then, of course, there's always a few people that are still feeling challenged.
Right, yeah, for sure. And I imagine that a lot of the people that have joined this call that will be listening to this recording are after these types of results where we're looking for optimism, hope, interest, clarity, that emotional connection to what's going on, and the ability to facilitate that real, honest, and engaging conversations as we're all in this state of uncertainty. So while a virtual map isn't the right solution for all contexts, I want to just call out a few things as we think about how to effectively engage people remotely through this period. The small group conversation, as we can have those and facilitate those, they really help people interact with each other. They bring in that social component that you talked about at the beginning, especially as we can feel more isolated at home. I think the visuals can give us a really common language and provide a strong anchor point, so bringing in that visualization, helping people have that shared meaning. Building in interactivity and different types of engagement, as I mentioned a few times, helps maintain that attention when it's so easy to be distracted. There's just so many things going on at home. And then make it as easy as possible for the facilitators. So anything you can do to just make it easier to use the technology and easier to engage people can be extremely helpful.
Yeah.
So Gary, I'm going to pass it back off to you as well here to wrap us up here.
Sure, Jill. I think my summary of what you're saying is in order for us to get to this point where we're getting people excited, we have to be really focused on this behavioral and social component here. And what we know is that when we're trying to change skill sets, as we're trying to change skill sets, we have to change mindset first. So we want to see results like I'm excited and I'm positive, because that's the precursor to people changing actions and behaviors. And today, right now, what we know is that people are going to have to change their actions and behaviors in order to keep our businesses moving forward. So one more time, true engagement occurs when you engage people emotionally, intellectually, behaviorally, and socially. And Jill, thanks for sharing your case study with us of an organization who did all four.
Absolutely.
So, thanks. Yeah, so as we ended our session yesterday, we asked our 400-plus participants, what's most important for you to talk about next? We're having a weekly conversation like this on Tuesday afternoons at 2 o'clock Eastern Time, and we gave you two choices based on some feedback we had heard the previous week. We said, are you more interested in managing a remote team, the topic managing a remote team, or the topic of creating a digital conference, knowing that many of you had canceled your conferences? And what we heard is that 76% of you wanted to learn more about managing a remote team, and 24% of you on creating a digital conference. So on next Tuesday, we will have one of our manager specialists or experts from Root with us to talk about managing a remote team, and not just how do managers engage their team, but how do we need to engage our managers differently. One of the comments we heard today are verbatim, and we won't tell you from which client it was. Someone's manager said, I'm doing nothing because I don't know what to do. I'm paralyzed. And I'm sure lots of us feel that way. So the first thing we're going to talk about next week is how do you help managers understand their role, responsibility, what to say and what to do, and then how do they engage a remote team differently. So with that, we want you to mark your calendars. We'll send you another invite for that next week. But Jill, we also had questions come at us. Let's see if we can handle some questions right now. We have our producer, Jessica Greer, with us in the background today, and she's going to see if she can type us in a few questions.
Yep, and I see the first one up here is from Craig. To be clear, these 50,000 people from this case study were not home workers, and that's correct. They were not all home workers, but they were distributed across the U.S. And so I think the concept is how do you engage people no matter where they are and that virtual setting. So having them be at home has its own set of distractions, but I think the same set of principles applies to people in any setting, any context virtually.
Sure. Makes sense. Thank you for that, Craig. Really good clarifier. And most of these I think will be for you, Jill, so if you don't mind, I'll read them to you.
Sure.
So Chad asked us, in the example that you shared, what are the best practices for encouraging discussion while preventing people from talking over each other, especially with cell phone delays and video lag?
It's a really good question. I think for me, the biggest thing is to acknowledge at the beginning that it's going to be a little bit awkward, regardless of how well set up it is or how many best practices you're implementing. There's going to be some awkward moments in the virtual setting, especially as you have technology glitches. I think what you can do is have a little bit of fun with it. We're all human, we're all working through it, and that actually engages people even more when they know that everyone's working through this. So I think be prepared and have a plan for are you using the chat function? Are you having people raise their hands using the raise hand feature in WebEx? So that can be prepared with how you're going to bring people into the conversation. But also be okay with a little bit of awkwardness and just call that out and recognize it up front.
For sure. Yeah. And you know what? I think if you're doing it enough, it'll feel less awkward. It'll feel like a new normal. But great question, Chad. And then we had another question from Mitos yesterday that I think both you and I answered, but let me ask for your response first. In their organization, they say, unfortunately, we don't have the time for our unit managers to attend virtual learning as they support their clients and are scrambling just to run the business. So what can we do for those folks? And I know you and I had some different answers, so let me let you go first.
Yep, and I actually don't really remember exactly what my answer was yesterday, but I'll go for it again. I think one thing is how do you provide smaller chunks of information so it doesn't always have to be 60 to 90-minute small group discussions. That is one format that works really well for certain types of engagement. But if it's updating people, you know, how do you can have smaller chunks of information that's provided in a creative way that maybe is a video update from your leaders, for example, or having smaller discussions. So I think part of it is understanding that context and knowing that people are busy and understanding what is the objective of what you're trying to engage them with. And if it really does require 60 minutes, then we need to make time for that and have a real conversation about it. But if it is more update and really getting information out to them, I think you can do it in smaller modules or engage them in those smaller chunks. Gary, what do you think?
Yeah, a lot of similarities there. But first I want to be just a little bit provocative. We oftentimes use time as the excuse, and I do not want to insult anybody. I'm not saying it's an excuse at this time. But if you don't have time to pause and sharpen the axe for a new strategy, then it can take you longer to change, and that could be detrimental. So first, I just encourage everybody that we may be in a place where we need to pause for a moment and take people offline. The work will be there when they get back. In those circumstances where that is absolutely impossible, I think we're aligned, Jill. We have to look at learning bursts. So how do we provide people what they need to know just in time when they need to know it, and still do it in a fun and potentially interactive way. So thinking about short learning bursts that may use humor to get people's attention, have a gaming element or even a competitive element, maybe even a leaderboard where people get points for who has actually taken the learning, who's responded, who's contributed. So shorter bursts just in time with a competitive or gaming element that allows people to still feel like they're a part of something bigger than themselves and they're interacting with others. And again, challenge yourself. Is this big enough to pause for a minute and take a deep breath and take in some new learning?
Yep, I love that, Gary. So let me read this next question from you, is virtual map ideal for an education experience that's virtual? So is the virtual map really the best option? What do you think?
I think there's lots of options out there. The virtual map is one of many. So we have to look at the situation. You know, companies are like fingerprints. Every single one of them are unique and different, and you are a special snowflake, so we have to figure out together what would work for you. So virtual may be the best way. The virtual one says that you have the ability to bring people together in groups for a period of time. So our last question said that's not possible. In that case, you know, you may want to think about solutions that are geared for individuals, solutions that are geared in shorter amount of times, things like the use of video or animation. Is it just auditory instead of auditory and visual? So what I'd say is it is ideal when you can bring a group of people together remotely for a period of time of 30, 45, 60 minutes. Otherwise, there are a host of other options. In a good, better, best world, it's pretty damn good.
Awesome.
Let me
All
ask
right.
you the next. Anything to add to that, or should I ask you the next question? I'll ask you the next.
You can ask me. Yes, we'll call out the awkwardness of that exchange and laugh at ourselves a little, and then you can ask the question.
Not awkward, definitely not. So, Jill, Laura is asking you, what are some topics that you recommend on how to keep your sales team engaged who usually don't work remote? Oh, I love this question.
Yeah, this is right up your alley, actually. So I think it's a really good question. I'm actually curious what you're going to say, Gary, being in the sales,
all right. So,
the sales
thank
role.
you for throwing it back to me. So
I sure did.
I've spent most of my last 34-year career in a client-facing role, consulting, selling, speaking, et cetera. So my entire world is usually client-facing. And what I'd say is that for many of us who are client-facing, we crave interaction. It's one of the reasons why I like hosting this WebEx or my blog or any of the other outreach I do. We crave social interaction. So for those people who are out of the office and they're used to being in sales, you want to keep that communication going on with the team. I know the client-facing people at Root are constantly texting and emailing. I have more emails now than during a regular work time, except they're all internal. So there's that piece. And that for your sales team that's working remote, I think there's still an opportunity for you to have regular meetings with them as they plan and strategize how they're going to reach out. So for us at Root right now, what we know is that we're not looking to sell our clients. Our clients are in a place where they're just trying to figure out which end is up, as we all are. So we're just focused on talking to each other about what's the best outreach. How are we reaching out to clients, showing that we care, asking if we can brainstorm with them, et cetera. And we are socializing ideas and putting them into practice right away. So if they get succinct, make sure that your sales team is staying social, that they're engaging with one another, and that they're brainstorming about what the customer wants and needs right now, and they're doing that through WebEx, email, phone conversation, all the technology that's at hand.
Yeah, and Gary, the one thing I would add to that is what we've been doing at Root is having some internal sessions on familiarizing with different types of technology. So how do we use WebEx Training Center? What are some different ways that we can help our clients with these virtual tools? So some internal education on just even how to use the tools, the technology, what's available can be super helpful in terms of topics. I know that I've found it really helpful in the last couple of weeks.
I agree. I was at a WebEx training session this afternoon, and one of our lead salespeople was on there sort of just leading the way. The way he's adopted it is incredible. So, yeah, for sure. RB's got a question for you specifically, Jill. If I need to reach 300 people, how do I do that in those groups of 6 or 10 that you mentioned in your case study? That seems kind of hard.
Yep. Yeah, I mean, it can be challenging. I think you need to think through logistics there and think about it ahead of what time frame you want to engage people in, how that could work. But I think the biggest thing is enabling your people, so it doesn't need to be all of the same 3 facilitators that are doing every one of those groups. Enabling your managers to have sessions with their teams or to have a group of high potential employees be facilitators and be trained as facilitators can then extend that, that responsibility and accelerate the time that it takes to get a similar message through and a similar conversation through a number of small groups. And then I think the beauty of something like a virtual map is that you have discussions and dialogue, but it's all around the same topic. So you have an anchor point of what the messaging that you want to share is that can be scaled pretty easily and without having to script everything. And then it's a really natural discussion in each of those small groups. Gary, what else do you think? What did I miss there?
Well, I think, you know, we talked about managers as our next topic for next Tuesday at 2 Eastern time. And I think this is the time where you really can bring in your managers to be your facilitators. They can bring intact teams together. So if you have an organization of 50,000 people and you have 500 managers, those 500 managers are now engaging the next 6, 8, or 10 below them. So it's important for us to enlist our people leaders here, and this thing can cascade very, very quickly. Matter of fact, most of our work is done in a cascade methodology, and you may also adopt that for yourself. You have a few people who understand, who can then train quite a few people to engage even more people, the masses. So we can go from 5 to 50 to 500 to 50,000 very, very quickly. And when I mean quickly, a week, a month, 3 months. But in these days, think more about how can you do this in just a few days, and it can be done. We can give you some advice on that.
Yep. Thanks, Gary. And I think this is our last question here from Tara. What other distant online tools for training have you found helpful, like we showed today?
Yeah, so there's just a few that I just mentioned, and these are things that you may be able to do yourself or you may need a partner for, but for sure video, short video bursts seem to be, you know, all the rage. Can I get 30 seconds to 3 minutes of a piece of information? And that can be done online, on your phone, you know, pretty much from anywhere, your computer, your phone, your iPad. So that's sort of the #1 for me. Short burst video is great. And then again, I would say anything that's interactive with a gaming element that provides a group challenge where you can be tracking yourself against your team members. So something with a competitive element or a social element to it.
Yep, and I think also just, I think it's also looking at the tools that you have and leveraging those and thinking about how you facilitate within those tools. So the virtual map is an example where you can use any web conferencing platform to share that and to have those conversations. So I think it's good to look at what tools are out there and make sure that we're making it as easy for ourselves as possible and what can you do, but knowing that, you know, budgets are pretty tight these days and we just are working as fast as we can, looking at what we already have and then how do you create the engagement within those tools we already have, I think is an interesting way to look at that and kind of a fun challenge, honestly.
Yeah, and I think maybe I'd close that question with, here's what we know for sure. We all will have our different experiences and opinions on good, better, best training tools that we have found helpful in an online format. Nothing is not an option. Not communicating, not engaging at this point, at this juncture is not an option. Even if it's just to say things are changing so quickly we don't have an answer, but we're working on it. You must engage and communicate. You must give your people some direction. So we hope this WebEx has been helpful in thinking about how you might do that. If you are listening to this, you've already gotten a link to this recording, and you've likely gotten a survey asking you what's important for you to learn more about. As a reminder to you, we will be back on Tuesday at 2 o'clock Eastern talking about managing a remote team. Until then, you are very welcome to reach out to either Jill or me. You see here our email addresses and our phone number. We're happy to respond, and we thank you so much for joining us. Jill, why don't you take us away by saying goodbye to everybody?
All right, thanks everyone. Have a great day.